Breath of the Wild is perhaps The Legend of Zelda's most vast version of Hyrule's land. However, for some fans, there are a lot of mysteries that seem to provide a plethora of confusing clues to Zelda lore and its mythology. It's not that these locations don't make any sense gameplay-wise, but rather incline on some lore inconsistencies, Hyrule's original history, and what explicitly these locations imply plot-wise for even Tears of the Kingdom. So here are 5 confusing locations in Breath of the Wild. Mekar Island. Breath of the Wild has lots of locations that reference previous Zelda titles, including Mekar Island. The island sits directly west of the Korok Forest and the Lost Woods. Mekar Island is devoid of life, hosting only a dead tree in its center. If Link steps on the island at night, a group of various stall enemies will rise up and attack him. Its peculiarity has caused lots of Zelda fans to theorize on the island's symbolism. Perhaps it's more than a neat reference. The island seems to have a lot to do with death, stalfos at night, piles of bones, and a single dead tree with skull-like textures. But there's also a neat fan theory that kind of explains this island. When the Koroks were fleeing, the Great Deku Tree passed his spirit to all the trees in the forest to protect them, and that's why we kind of see the trees in Breath of the Wild to look similar to having faces. This location references back to Makar, a Korok from the Wind Waker, who is also the Sage of Wind. Makar perhaps sacrificed himself to create a huge move using wind to protect his people. And every time you climb the tree, a strong gust of wind picks up, sort of a homage to the character they named the island after. Again, this is huge speculation and some flaws to this theory, but this location is exactly why it's on this list. This place is confusing and implies homage to a sage. Yet lore-wise, it doesn't seem to make much sense at all. Forgotten Temple. As the name suggests, the Forgotten Temple is a historical temple once used by the worship of goddess Hylia. The Forgotten Temple now stands abandoned in a state of decay and is populated by guardians that you must navigate through to explore the ruins and even reach the shrine. And the Forgotten Temple houses the biggest statue of Hylia that can be seen in this game. If you climb up the goddess statue and take a closer look, it resembles a large goddess statue from Skyward Sword where the Master Sword was held. And you can also notice a statue of a Loftwing in the outside. That gives even more credibility to the idea that the statue is a Skyloft goddess statue. It becomes really clear that this existed around the time of Skyward Sword and likely built some time after the game ended. The temple also shares many references to the palaces or temples in Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. The King of Hyrule in Zelda 2 had those temples filled with guardians and enemies to test the hero to be, and lo, this Forgotten Temple has something similar, with decaying guardians and a shrine to, well, test the hero. You also receive something very special here later on in the game, although there is a strange theory that the temple is a reference to the Triforce, which fans have been theorizing about for years, and that Nintendo may finally be making this somewhat canon. The theory is that the Triforce used to have 4 pieces, but the people of Hyrule abandoned one of their 4 goddesses and tried to erase her from the history. There are plenty of references to the existence of the Triforce in Breath of the Wild, like the monks being the first 4 shrines, and you need to present 4 spirit orbs to the goddess statue, but in general there are just a lot of patterns of 4 within Breath of the Wild, whereas previous Zelda games just used patterns of 3. However, from creating a champion, the developer quotes, "Since it is a building that represents Hyrule's ancient past, the design incorporates construction elements from Skyward Sword in a similar way to the Springs of Wisdom, Courage, and Power, as well as Lanayru Road." So while fans will theorize that Skyward Sword and the Triforce are somehow connected to the Forgotten Temple, this location is still left to a mystery if we take the developer's word as fact that they were only really inspired by Skyward Sword and perhaps Zelda 2, and it has no deeper meaning than just that. Confusing, but with Nintendo doing this in most Zelda games to inspire their next ones, we will just leave it as a mystery for now. Temple of Time. The temple is located near the center of the Great Plateau and is one of the first landmarks that Link finds when he awakens from the Shrine of Resurrection. The temple is in ruins, having been ravaged by the Calamity Ganon. Many bokoblins can be even found roaming the area surrounding the Temple of Time. Most fans used to assume that it was just a rebuilt homage to the original Temple of Time from Ocarina of Time, but that doesn't seem to be the case. It's both the same and a different Temple of Time in the sense that it's been well over 10,000 years between Ocarina of Time and even Breath of the Wild. Bearing that all the disasters that took place between the games, the temple would have needed to be maintained, meaning that the renovations would have been inevitable. With the Temple of Time, clearly the Master Sword's chamber is not maintained and not even seen. Let's not forget Hyrule Historia. It states, in order to protect the Triforce, Hyrule Castle was built in the center of Hyrule, where the Temple of Time was located. Does this actually match with Breath of the Wild? Well, let's ask the old man, in which he states, this is the Great Plateau. According to legend, this is the birthplace of the entire kingdom of Hyrule. So since the Temple of Time is here, and this place is acknowledged to be the birthplace of Hyrule, it stands to reason that Castle Town has to be present in some form. But this is why the Temple of Time is a confusing location. If this is truly the birthplace of Hyrule's kingdom, then that leads to the next place that includes this confusing mystery. Hyrule Castle. Prior to the Second Great Calamity, it was the government seat of Hyrule Kingdom, ruled under King Rome. It has since served as a location where Princess Zelda has kept Calamity Ganon sealed while Link was dormant under a shrine. However, many fans have a collective theory that Hyrule Castle was near the Great Plateau many centuries ago and moved to the spot that it's in now. Given that the Temple of Time and the Eastern Abbey are the same ones from Ocarina of Time, and that the castle can now move and perhaps rise as seen in all of these Tears of the Kingdom trailers, Hyrule Castle could have possibly been originally located near or in the Great Plateau. And even according to Creating a Champion, the developer notes state that the Great Plateau is paired with the castle as if one were male and the other were female. For example, when looking at the bird statues, the plateau statues have a feminine, supple silhouette, while the castle statues are more masculine. So it really seems like Nintendo knows exactly what they were doing with this. While the Temple of Time could have stayed in position at the Great Plateau, Hyrule Castle and its purpose might have been originally built from there as well. The Great Plateau was the puzzle piece missing from the original foundation of Hyrule Castle. But this is where it gets more confusing. The theory gets into deeper detail with the original concept of the divine beasts. We can even see one in Creating a Champion of a moving city. So while Link in Breath of the Wild can enter Hyrule Kingdom, this map is similar to that of a divine beast. So why it's so confusing is that it has two parts now, the location not being originally there and perhaps moved 10,000 years ago, and the possibility of Hyrule Castle being a moving city that was established and designed from the Sheikah similar to a divine beast to hold Ganondorf dormant underneath this castle. And is it possible that Hyrule Kingdom was brought down to specifically seal Ganon away in this location? Perhaps these theories aren't too far from the truth when we are starting to play and know Tears of the Kingdom. Springs of the Triforce. To be fair, the springs are of course very important in terms of the story in Breath of the Wild, but their locations and origins seem to be very bewildering. One thing to start on would be, how exactly are these springs containing references to the Triforce's aspects and the three dragons who are tied to the springs of power, wisdom, and courage found in this game? The game makes few references to the symbol beyond its brief appearance as the representation of Zelda's sealing power, but the springs aren't really deemed important like they were in Skyward Sword. Zelda was also known in this game to use these springs to cleanse her body, and in Breath of the Wild, at some point in the past, Princess Zelda visited each of these springs to pray to the goddess Hylia in an attempt to awaken her power in sealing and defeating Calamity Ganon. As we can see, the goddess crest can also be chiseled to the platform in front of the goddess statue at both the Spring of Power, Spring of Wisdom, and the Spring of Courage. To me and many other fans would agree about is that these springs always have looked like there was something more to them. It almost seems like they are sacred, of course. We see Link hearing the blessing of Hylia herself, but kind of useless and confusing in their natural and lore sense. You know, just exploring and knowing the implications of the story for these springs just leaves me at a loss, and it seems like other fans would agree. These springs' purposes and the Triforce, and even Hylia as a whole, aren't really delved into for the mythology of Breath of the Wild, and their locations are as confusing as Zelda's reaction to her unawakened power from these springs.
Curse you.
But hey, at least the Sheikah built a shrine behind the Hylian statues, so it all ends well for the chosen hero, just not maybe for the success of Zelda.
I've pleaded to the spirits tied to the ancient gods, and still the holy powers have proven deaf to my devotion. Please, just tell me. What is it? What's wrong with me?
And with that, we are going to wrap up 5 confusing locations in the Breath of the Wild. What do we think of these locations? Do you agree or disagree with the confusion? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video.